Crusader Kings III is a game that beguiles and baffles me. As a grand strategy game, it is hugely complicated, but it has elements of a role-playing game, and I adore the stories that emerge from that. With this in mind, I decided to invite Nate from Rock Paper Shotgun The Site to talk us through the basics of Crusader Kings III, the improvements, what he likes and what he doesn't. He's played the game for a few days for a preview, and I've linked to the words below, and joins us to share his thoughts. Apologies for the echoey mic, just pretend he's recording in the stone halls of a medieval monastery for full immersion. So Nate, for people completely new to Crusader Kings III, what is the game in a nutshell?
Grand strategy, if you're wondering what the term means, is it's basically a really big, complicated strategy game. Paradox, who make the Crusader Kings games, are the sort of dads of grand strategy. That is what they do best, and they do it very well indeed. Crusader Kings is a bit like, to look at, Europa Universalis, or Imperator Rome, or the Victoria games. So there are other historical grand strategy games. You've got a big map of the world split up into different territories, and you've got a sort of a top-down view, and there's millions of little numbers tracking every conceivable characteristic of all of those territories. Now, where Crusader Kings is different is that it's also, as you've already suggested, an RPG. So it's set in the Middle Ages, which is a loosely defined period, but in Crusader Kings III, that starts either in 867 AD, when the Vikings were doing their business, or 1066 AD, which obviously is like the stereotypical date that all schoolboys know.
We're talking classic Bayeux Tapestry territory here.
Yeah, so that's the sort of the start point. You can choose your start point, and it goes on for a few hundred years. I'm not actually certain where the end date of CK3 is, but you can flash it up on the screen so it looks like I've gone and checked. And you can, starting at that point, you can choose any political entity that existed in the world at that time. You might choose a petty kingdom in Ireland. You might choose a small state in Northern Africa, or one of the many tiny little countries that made up the Holy Roman Empire in Middle Europe, or you could be the Holy Roman Empire or France or someone massive like that. But you're not playing as the country, you're playing as the ruler. And that ruler is represented by a little portrait at the side of the screen, and it sort of gets old and injured and stuff as you do. And it's attached to all sorts of characteristics and traits and stats, and you're faced with a lot of decisions as that ruler, which appear as sometimes pop-up boxes. Sometimes you can initiate events by clicking on portraits of other people, because there are thousands of them simulated in the game. They've all got their own personalities, and you can do all sorts of things to or with them. And of course, when your ruler dies, it's not game over. You play as their heir, so the person who inherits their titles and maybe some of their reputation.
From this footage we can see that the terrain looks shinier and you've got 3D modelled portrait, but what's actually improved about what you're doing?
Paradox really saw why people loved CK2, and that was because it was such a good story generator, and it was such a surprisingly good medieval role-playing game that sort of came out of nowhere in the strategy game. So they've really doubled down on it, and one of the major things is, I've said you play as a ruler, and obviously you play as their heir and then their heir after that. There's this sort of incredible metagame there, because you're playing now as the dynasty. You're not just working for your prestige and success and pleasure and things in one mortal lifespan. You're doing things that are going to echo down hundreds of years.
And you're shaping your bloodline's reputation?
You're trying to make your dynasty more famous. So ways you can do that, for example, are, winning wars and the classics. But you can also marry off members of your family to foreign nations. Now you could do that in CK2, But there wasn't always a lot of point in it. And of course, in medieval history, people were getting married off all the time. But, you ended up with these sort of stacks of unwanted progeny because there wasn't always much benefit to be had in marrying them off. But now, of course, like if if you've got a few kids too many and decide some of them can find love in back end of Germany, tiny principality, it's not going to benefit you in the short term, but that's going to spread your dynasty and spread the name of your dynasty and increase the number of people in it, and so it gets more famous over time. And that's got all sorts of benefits. You can unlock permanent perks that will apply to all of your descendants. You could make them more likely to be long-lived, or more likely to inherit good traits, or you could make them you could make them prone to being giants, which I think is quite cool.
So you can have an endless bloodline of humongous babies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or you could just make them really good at being horrible.
Really?
Yeah, you can make them dreadful, literally dreadful. They cause dread.
Now dread is a new characteristic, right?
Yeah, dread's brilliant. In Paradox games, generally, everything comes about as a result of very, very many variables, which are always being tracked and are slowly increasing or decreasing over time based on a load of things acting on them. Dread is a really choice variable, and it applies to characters in the game and describes how frightening they are. So Jason Statham would have a dread in the hundreds, whereas Tony Hart would probably have, he would not even have dread in double figures.
What about Judge Dredd?
Judge Dredd? Oh, well, you don't want to mess around with him. I'd say he's probably in the high 80s. I mean, he's not Stathamic levels, but he's pretty dreadful. He can't spell dread either, which is, just a mark of disrespect to the concept.
Is dread something you pursue, or are you born with it?
Both. It stems from the feudal system, which is central to the game. You can only manage so much stuff directly, so you have to pass on your authority to a load of vassals who are lords of less power, who manage, who hold titles beneath you and sort of run smaller chunks of your territory. Now, they raise your armies and they raise taxes and they can help you out if someone's trying to assassinate you, but you've got to keep them happy. Previously, Crusader Kings II involved quite a lot of currying favour with them to try and keep you in your vassals' good books. That's one style of rulership. But you might play and think, well, it really shouldn't be up to a king to be constantly sort of, cooking biscuits for his underlings so they don't turn against him. What about ruling through an iron fist? And that's what dread's about. So if you've got a lot of dread, they're not going to think twice before acquiescing to even your most unreasonable demands. If you ask them to jump, they will invade Byzantium.
Can dread backfire?
One of my lineage was really ramping up the dread because they got horribly maimed in a battle and gave them they could do like frightening grimaces at people, and that gave them a natural boost to their dread if they wanted to use it. It's quite nice actually. It's not saying like disfigured people are frightening, but it's saying that a disfigured lord can be frightening to people if he chooses to use that, which I think is quite good actually. And so I had him sort of do loads of torturing just to try and up their dread, but then they succumbed to a disease, and that was that.
In your preview, you talk about trying to deal with rotten apples before they inherit the throne.
Yeah, so like I say, every character in the game has got all of these stats, and they've got traits as well. And some of them people are born with. I don't know how you can be born lazy. Well, I don't know, babies are actually astonishingly idle. A diligent newborn. But they're born with some traits, and they develop some based on their childhood experiences and based on the people they're tutored by and things like that. And so you sort of keep a close eye, depending on what sort of succession law you've got in place. One or more of them will be inheriting your stuff. If there's someone who sort of pulls the legs off dogs, so you potentially got a problem. We need to talk about ye olde Kevin. So if you think someone's going to be a problem, you can try and deal with them. There's many schemes in the game, and one of the schemes is the old murder. You can be far more creative. One of my heirs was this sort of growling horror who was going to instantly offend the entire priesthood. And so I was desperate for him not to inherit the throne, and I put him at the head of the army. And he was rubbish at war. But he kept surviving the battles and getting better at war.
Oh no.
Until he was just like a sort of lumpen Kratos. And everyone loved him for being so good at fights. And that really backfired.
You planted the seeds of your own destruction.
That's it. And that's the thing about this game, right? And that was the thing about CK2. It's just so good for generating narratives.
I've always struggled to unpick the game, but I adore the anecdotes people tell about their adventures. Is there anything done to make it friendlier to beginners?
It's not the sexiest change, but it is one of the very most significant changes with Crusader Kings III. It is just so much better at explaining itself. They had a unique challenge in making this, because they've got a really dedicated long-term fan base who don't want the game watered down, but they've got all these people like you who would quite like to have a go, but just found Crusader Kings 2 a bit daunting. And this is the best of both worlds. I don't think they've sacrificed much complexity at all. I think there's been a little streamlining in places, but there's nowhere where it feels like, the core of the sort of historical immensity of it all has been taken away. But there's tooltips everywhere, for example, something as simple as that. So if you don't know what something means, or you need reminding of who someone is, just one click will bring the information up that you need. So they've done a lot beyond that with the UI as well, just so you know what you're looking at. You've also got a little reminder button at the top of the screen, or an advice button, I think it's called. But what it does is tells you all of the things it would be a shame if you forgot. So if there are claims you can press to declare war on other nations, which is classic medieval thing to do, it will remind you. Or if there are important vassals who are not happy with you because they haven't got a seat on your council, or if you've got a council seat vacant, or if the Pope is likely to respond positively should you beg him for money, things like that. It will tell you that you could go ahead and do that. Actually, having said they've done so much to make it simpler, I still find claims and titles a little bit tricky to understand, because
Right.
there's a lot of abstract looking shields with sort of similar designs on them, and there's a whole hierarchy of different titles and territories that can overlap two different de jure domains, and I get faintly anxious just talking about it, to be honest. Feudalism is finicky enough that you couldn't really simplify it without losing some fidelity, and
Right.
I think that's fine. It's not really a problem when I find myself unsure of how title is going to pass once my ruler's dead. I find it such a fun game to just roll with the punches in that it doesn't matter. I think, well, I'm pretty sure that when I inherit this kingdom, half of it's going to belong to my uncle who's a devil worshipper. But that's okay, that will be a challenge in itself. It's like, it's a whole new set of things to adapt to, and it's a whole load of new opportunities that you won't even know till you've got yourself into the mess. So, yeah, I don't mind being bamboozled occasionally.
Well, maybe I'll finally have a chance of digging into this one.
I think the last thing to mention as well is that Crusader Kings II was a game that evolved into what it is over a massive number of expansions. Obviously Like, Crusader Kings 3 is not going to have, like, everything that all of those expansions added to CK2 over, like, 8 years. It's got a lot of the best bits from day one, and I think it's, it's a great distillation of what CK2 was at its best, but it's been designed that way from the ground up. So it'll be exciting to see where it goes after day one.
And we won't have that long to wait as Crusader Kings 3 comes to PC on September the 1st. Thanks to Nate for talking us through it, and please do check out his written preview. I've linked to it in the comments for loads more thoughts on this. If you have any questions about Crusader Kings 3, pop them in the comments and I'll try to find some answers for them. Thanks for watching Rock Paper Shotgun, and we'll hopefully see you again soon. Bye for now.